Around 2018, I was applying for video game playtesting here and there. One day I was hired to test one game, and while I was happy, I didn't expect much. That's until it was revealed that we were working on Marvel's Guardian of the Galaxy. I'll never get over these titles. 16 years after Rocky Balboa, and companies still struggle out of shame to give a number or a subtitle to their work. The game itself was pleasant enough, even if in its rougher phase, but some lingering impressions that I had were shared by many upon release and caused some issues for the final product. At the time, and still to this day actually, I was tired of superhero movies, and despite liking the Guardians movie, it felt like they were capitalizing on its popularity a little too late. It reminded me of movie tie-in releases and not a passion project. I eventually forgot about the game until it was revealed at E3 2021. I still wasn't particularly thrilled. At that moment, Avengers Endgame had released, so the general interest for Marvel had dropped down. For many, it was effectively the last stop. In the theater of games, Marvel's Avengers had released. The trailers had foretold a lukewarm reception. The political turn of Marvel was the cherry on top, a cherry that was genetically modified. They were so deep into politics that the cherry resembled one of those giant pumpkins that you see at festivals. Given all of this context, you can understand how the game underperformed. It was set up to fail and killed any chance the game had, which is sad because the game turned out to be amazing. Guardians of the Galaxy's player base peaked at about 11,000 at around the time of release according to Steam numbers. Compare that to the hilariously forgotten Shadow of the Tomb Raider, which managed to sell 4 million copies and had 38,000 players, and you have a pretty dim future for the game's popularity. Again, a sad fate for such an amazing game. Upon testing it, I knew it was decent at least, good but nothing special. The final product, however, exceeded those expectations. It's not a life-changing game, but it's a well-made game nonetheless. The biggest thing in my mind when playing this game is that it reminds me of a game made in the early 2000s. It has good production values, but not to the point that it overshadows the game like most modern productions. It has a main gameplay loop that sticks to, with occasional distractions to change the pace. The music is great, and the voice acting is good, but you're not distracted by high-profile actors like Nolan North, Steve Blum, or Troy Baker. Now, let's dissect in order each aspects, starting with the graphics. In terms of environmental design, the game does a good job of two things. One, being detailed and lived in, but not forcing attention to itself. It would be easy to have the camera constantly pan to any given background and wrench control away from the player. Instead, it just lets you be, and because it lets you be, I'm more inclined to take my time and look at the surroundings, especially the inside of the Milano. I love when a game lets you visit a character's room. It's more impactful than in a movie because you can actually take your time to admire the details and get to know the character. The Milano looks like what a spaceship would become in the future. The material it's made of looks like actual shuttle material, but it has the convenience of modern life, like a living room and a fridge. Actual shuttles are in a space in which you would actually want to live, and most ships in fiction look like your house but in space. This strikes a nice middle ground. It would also be appropriate to touch upon the character designs. Being as brilliant as they are, you can clearly see that they've taken into account that this is a video game. The comic designs are sometimes too outlandish, so when they're adapted, they often become more subdued and realistic. It works for a movie, but that often means less iconic designs that lack the ease of recognition. The outfits of this game have the best of both worlds. They're colorful and boast the elements of the movie and book versions. The only outfit I'm less keen on is Star-Lord. The outfit itself is amazing, but his face and haircut look pleasant initially. He looks like a hipster from a useless major in university. It's one of the things that discouraged me from the game despite its quality alpha build. I thought it would be a bootleg version of the Guardians made as a cash grab, but it ended up being a legitimate passion project. Also a rare occurrence in modern video games, the title boasts a large plethora of costumes, 45 to be exact, most from the comic books and some made specifically for this game. There are some I like less, but they're all well designed and chosen. My only pet peeve is that I would have wished for some elements of the first costume to be reincorporated into the exclusive costumes at the very least. I understand why the comic accurate costumes don't have those elements. Some things about that design, however, are too good to be lost, especially the boots. The Walkman does reappear in certain costumes, but it would have been nice to toggle it on and off as an option, especially since it's an item of importance. Ghost of Tsushima did something similar with the projectile weapons. So did Mortal Shell now that I think about it. The Walkman does appear sometimes on other costumes, but upon further notice it seems to be a glitch, as it appears and disappears. Another graphical detail I enjoyed and seems to be overlooked are the facial animations and lip syncing. It's the kind of thing that, when done well, you forget about it. Other details like that shine throughout, like the characters getting muddy and wet consistently while wearing their various costumes. Now it's time for the main event, the gameplay. The player takes control of Star-Lord. He's able to jump, shoot, glide, dodge, and uses elemental guns and a set of 4 special skills. His moveset is pretty basic. Where the game really shines is in the cooperation of the different characters. Each character attacks automatically until Star-Lord gives the order. All 4 have 4 unique skills that can be used after a cooldown period. What makes these interesting is how they synergize together. Members each have a type of damage function. For example, Groot will tangle enemies in his roots, while Gamora does physical attacks that do high damage and low stun. You also want to attack in a certain order to really gain full advantage of the team and not interrupt each other. Star-Lord is weak alone, but in using teamwork you make it through. The player also needs to follow a groove meter. Similarly to Devil May Cry, to have a good score, it's indispensable to vary your techniques and attack often. You gain more experience, but it also opens the possibility for finishers and tag team attacks with specific members. You have a brief opportunity to give an order to a member of your team. Gamora might cut an arm, Groot might rip 2 arms since he's stronger. As a last resort, you also have the ability to perform a move called a Huddle Up. Star-Lord summons the team and gives them a pep talk. If successful, everyone is healed and gets a power increase. If not, everyone is healed but only Star-Lord gets a power increase. It's easily the worst mechanic in the game. It takes so long to wait for the characters to finish talking and for you to choose your dialogue. You can change that in the myriad of options by having it automatically succeed. Unfortunately, it helps only so much. You still have to go through your team's dialogue and Star-Lord answering. It lasts a minute but feels like 6 hours. It's an interesting concept, but you're taken out of the action for too long. If the game just slowed down and offered multiple options, it might be better. The mail answering in Catherine is a better way to have a structured conversation with an NPC. Speaking of which, the game doesn't fail to offer a multitude of options to customize gameplay. Here's a list since there's so many. From the type of sound you want, the sensitivity, and even the customization of difficulty, a really rare feature, they have everything. Well, except control remapping. I do understand that some changes could not be possible. The elemental abilities could be hard to remove from the D-pad, and the trackpad is not reliable. Even then, you would think you could change shooting from triggers to bumpers, or at least my biggest issue, hold or toggle the lock-on system. If gameplay is the main event in the traditional sense, then the story is the actual main event here, if not a close second. It's definitely one of its stronger aspects, and despite not being one who's sensitive about spoiler culture, I would strongly recommend you play before watching this segment. We went from spoiling the death of Dumbledore to refusing to reveal story elements of 30-year-old franchises. You know Darth Vader is Luke's father because you've seen 1,000 parodies of it. However, seeing how unpopular and recent this game is, I will not reveal too much and give you a chance to experience by yourself. For now, though, I will speak in broad terms. Guardians of the Galaxy presents fun space adventures, undercut by hard drama, like in the movies, but more pronounced, which is ironically the contrary of most Marvel movies, who are afraid of heartfelt moments. The Guardians start with one of their many get-rich-quick schemes, which on the surface makes them more similar to their movie counterpart, but much of the events of the story are based on Annihilation, Annihilation Conquest, and from the 2008 run of The Guardians. Starting from their failed capture of a monster, they decide instead to sell Groot or Rocket Raccoon, one of the many choices that make a second playthrough worth your while. That sell fails, and they experience their misadventures where they go from a really dysfunctional family to clearly invested individuals who are still dysfunctional. It's always surprising to go back to the beginning of the game and see how they hated each other. Now to go into specifics, the game carries more so from Annihilation and the 2008 run. The Church of Universal Truth are trying to spread the promise, a series of vision promising the victim's greatest desire, spread by Magus, the dark entity trapped inside the Soul Stone. The team runs across the church and its leader, Raker, after their first scheme, trying to infiltrate a restricted zone, goes south. At first, they're not interested in the conflict, but after the Nova Corps falls prey to them, it's clear that it's their problem whether they like it or not. Star-Lord drags the team along, even if himself is more preoccupied by his probable daughter Nikki and his ex Corel. After more examination, the chief of security of Nowhere and probable communist collaborator Cosmo the dog pushes them to investigate further. The Nova Corps is compromised and Corel dies. Nikki gets captured and the team fails initially to get her back. The team runs across the church and its leader Raker after their first scheme, trying to infiltrate a restricted zone, goes south. To make matters worse, Drax is converted. With the help of Mentis, however, they make it to Planet Lamentis, where Drax is cured by none other than Adam Warlock, the most pretentious man in the galaxy. Another failed attempt to rescue Nikki leaves them desperate, and so they fall back on an old plan of Drax. Go to Maklu 4, and in one of the many cases of foreshadowing, capture the legendary dragon Fin Fang Foom to get the favor of Lady Hellbender and her army of monsters. When all is done, they break through the church's defenses and convince Nikki, who was duped into becoming their matriarch, to stop. Adam Warlock absorbs Magus, his evil half, and defeats the leader of the church. Well, Magus makes a last-ditch attempt in a post-credits sequence, but the Motley Crew wins out in the end. There's three things to surmise from those events. First off, The narrative sets up the events well. If this game is what a normal game would look like 20 years ago, that also applies to the story. The classic setup and payoff was used commonly in Hollywood movies not so long ago, before they started to become more subversive. Fing Fang Foom sounded like a throwaway reference to an Iron Man villain, but it turned around to be one of the better confrontations in the game. Those bosses are few, and this felt refreshing from the mobs. Secondly, the story doesn't limit itself to what is important to the plot. It also features a lot of interesting interactions between characters. They banter about their past and reveal a lot about themselves. The narrative has other uses outside of moving the story forward. It can just flesh out world and characters. The last aspect that really struck me was the game's willingness to dive into dark subjects consistently, unlike the MCU that more often than not is in the process of undercutting tension with humor. The Guardian movies are one of the only movies to escape that mold. They're not afraid to have their emotions. The scene where Nikki is snapped out of her trance by Star-Lord is heart-wrenching. This little girl admits to knowing about her manipulation, but the pain of losing a loved one is so great she would rather live in lies forever. The moment is so strong that even without music that scene would work. With it, it's brought to another level. The crescendo rises with her pain, and you realize that a lot of people are probably stuck with that issue. Megas may not exist, but a lot of people prefer to live in lies. Usually, when I review a game, I seldom talk of the soundtrack. Despite my lesser knowledge in the realm of music, I still have comments to make as demonstrated earlier. The issue is that most games and media in general don't put that much effort in their music and sound design. The Guardians of the Galaxy have another three aspects that stand out for me in their sound design. First off, it licenses a plethora of songs from the 80s. I'm not sure if one of them doesn't fit in the era. One of the songs might be from the 90s, a la Metal Gear Solid 5, but so far most of them seem era accurate. They're also well chosen and fit the mood perfectly. It sounds like an understatement, but movies like the original Suicide Squad have shown us that some actually put music at random in their work. It would be hard to do an homage to the period with fake songs, like how in movies you might see Coca-Cola spelled with K instead of C. Speaking of which, there's an entire fake soundtrack invented for the game, performed by the sound designers. It emulates the look and feel of air metal bands, even down to the jacket cover and fake interviews. I remember seeing such things in store and in magazines, especially the elaborate covers depicting grandiose action. The fake soundtrack is itself contextualized as a band called Star-Lord that gives an origin to Peter Quill's nickname. One of the better origins, might I add. In 2013 it was revealed it was the title of the leader of Spartax. Also a good origin for the name, but in 2016, Sam Humphries turned it into ridicule by making it the name of the vacuum cleaner Quill used as a janitor at NASA. Turning Quill to ridicule is a constant in modern Marvel, but that's a story for another time. Naming himself after an Earthman is something that character would do. It strikes a nice balance of creating fake 80s iconography, but still having the leisure of actual licensed songs. And third and finally, the game has an orchestral soundtrack that doesn't simply try to harp on Hans Zimmer. It tries to have memorable moments. It doesn't serve as ambience background, but actual repeatable songs. Initially, I was just going to reiterate what I said. Guardians of the Galaxy is a good title that was set up to fail. It is a fun and recommendable game. I just have to mention that at the end of my first playthrough, I could not get one of the trophies. After getting all but one of them, a glitch kept me from the final one. It's not a game-breaking glitch. The game can simply be completed, but if you're looking to have a perfect record, it might be impossible. On my third playthrough, I realized that I had to erase the game profile and my saves because everything was corrupted once the glitch activates. I'm somewhat obsessive, but I don't usually care about trophies, but I started a fourth playthrough to get the final trophy out of spite. Most players, casual or not, won't care, but the game is poorly optimized, and while games have glitches, my rule is that completion should not be affected. It didn't ruin the game for me, even on my fourth playthrough. I'm actually really enjoying myself, but it's something to note. In the end, Guardians of the Galaxy is a really good game. It's not revolutionary, it's not mind blowing, but it's definitely better than average. It's not necessarily better than the sums of its parts, but it's a really fantastic game. Actually, that's one of the many things that you can surmise from this game. It's that it's just a game. It's not full of politics, it's not an agenda, it's not full of microtransactions, it's just a game.